Free motion machine quilting is one of my all-time favorite things to do, but I have to tell you, it doesn't always go well for me. And after reading some of the comments on some of the other videos, I understand it's not going perfectly well for all of you either. So I'm so glad that you are here today. I'm going to offer a couple of troubleshooting tips and techniques that will hopefully aid all of us in our free motion machine quilting. Let's get started. That is right, everybody. Welcome back to So Well with Rob Appell. I am your host from Stitchin Heaven, Rob Appell. Amazing how that works. And if it is your first time here, I'm super excited to see you as well. I am an over-caffeinated quilt maker, and I love to teach right here on YouTube, part of the Stitchin Heaven YouTube network. And like I said, blessed to be here. Now, hopefully you've seen some of the other videos I've put out recently on the 5 hacks for successful sewing machine maintenance, or maybe the tips to troubleshooting your tension or your thread tension videos, those kinds of things. One of the things I've had a lot of requests for is free motion quilting troubleshooting. And folks, this is going to be a really difficult video because there are so many challenges that happen when we drop those feed dogs and we start doing our free motion machine quilting. So I want to talk about some of the things that are maybe more generic that might be able to help all of us, some ideas that might just re-stem some memories or something like that, help us a little bit. But this is one of those ones that really gets kind of independent based on the fact that you could be a great machine quilter and sit down on a machine one day and just have a bad session. And that happens to me, and I'm sorry, but the well in So Well is about wellness. And I will tell you, there are times where I get very anxious about free motion quilting because I've got a beautiful quilt top in front of me and I really want the quilting to be awesome. And one of the stresses is just knowing the design. So we're not even going to talk about that today, but really that is probably one of the first big tips to free motion troubleshooting is know your design, know your motifs, know what you plan to do before you start doing it so that you're not just sitting there panicking like sometimes I do when I get excited about it. Marking out your quilts is a great idea, of course, but what we're going to talk about more today is things like threads and needles, the presser feet. So let's kind of dive into it. I want to talk about needles first, because needles can be a challenge, and a lot of us have recently gotten ourselves a sewing machine that is designed specifically for free motion machine quilting. So it is a straight stitch machine. It might be like a Baby Lock Jane or a Juki TL 2010. It might be like an old Pfaff Grand Quilter or Mega Quilter or something like that, a Brother 1500. So these are machines that are set up. They're kind of like a semi-industrial machine, but believe it or not, they run multiple styles of needles. So the first thing I'll point out, if you have a straight stitch only machine for free motion quilting, maybe it's a little bit larger, maybe it has a check spring in the bobbin case, chances are you should be using one of these HLX5 style needles. Now you can put a standard needle, and when I say standard, it's the coding system. The 130/705 is a standard code for a standard needle in a standard sewing machine. And yes, these will fit in your high-speed machines, but there's a part of the needle that allows the thread to travel safely at higher speeds. And these HLX5 needles are designed, and they really will help. So if you have a machine that is straight stitch only and you can piece on it beautifully, but the moment you start to do free motion quilting, you increasing the speed, you're dropping the feed dogs a bit, or maybe in a situation like that, those machines, usually the feed dogs don't drop, we just cover them. I know it sounds like a lot of talking, folks, but really you need to know, and a lot of times right on the side of your sewing machine, it will tell you, use HLX5 or high-speed needles. That's what they're looking for. Sometimes they're called serger needles, but make sure you're getting that code, that HLX5. That can make a giant difference, especially if you're having intermittent problems. Machine runs great for patchwork and terrible for free motion. It could be that you're not using the right style of needle. Secondly, and probably the more important troubleshooting, this is probably all that you really need to hear, is making sure that you have the proper presser foot on the machine. Now I know that sounds simple, folks, but it's not easy with free motion. And my beautiful Juki here actually came with multiple feet for free motion, and one works much better than the other. So let's talk about the different kinds of free motion feet that there are. When you look at the table here, you'll see I have a variety of feet out. A couple of these are what we call spring motion or hopping feet, which means that it's going to basically spring up and down with the needle. This bar rides on the needle, this part goes on the machine. I'll put it on for you here in a second so you can see that. But it really is going to go up and down with the stroke of the machine, the stroke of the needle. And I think that's really, really important. This foot does the exact same thing. It's a hopping foot, hops up and down. Old school, old-fashioned free motion presser foot, darning foot. Now they came out a few years back with these really neat feet that are like this, and this one has a spring, but it doesn't hop up and down. This is so I can adjust the amount of presser foot pressure. This clear foot right here, this would go straight onto the machine with very little effort, unlike putting on the free motion foot. So this is like a hover foot or a ruler foot, a foot that's not actually going to hop up and down. It's going to stay at a specific height. And folks, right there, that's what I want you to hear in this entire video. I think that could be the problem for a lot of you, especially if the machine had been doing great prior, and now you go to free motion and you're putting on some sort of a ruler foot or a non-hopping foot. And here's why. When you're doing free motion, your feed dogs are down and you're doing all of the motion yourself. So if the fabric is actually going up and down with the needle or with the thread, it's going to cause a lot of irregularities in the way the stitch itself is formed. So a hopping foot, let's put it on the machine so I can show you. So like I said, we're going to come over here. And a lot of times it's a bit of a pain because you got to get out a screwdriver. You've got to take out this screw. And on mine, I've got to take it all the way out. So switching the feet is not real convenient. Got to be careful with what I'm doing. And earlier I mentioned, you need to also know, are you a high shank? Are you a low shank? Are you a slant needle machine? Because that will determine the difference or the height here between where the screw goes and the bottom of the foot. That depends on what size presser foot. And on this particular machine, you can see they've put an adapter here, which means I could have accidentally put this foot on if I didn't know what that adapter was for, and the foot would not have worked properly. This is what I'm talking about. A lot of it is getting the right foot set up on the machine. So for me, as I come over here, I've got to slide the catch over this needle bar here, excuse me, the presser foot bar. And at the same time, right over here, I'm making sure that the spring part has now gotten up over the screw that holds the needle in the machine, because that's what's going to activate the foot. And you want to make sure that's on real tight. There's no play or wobble within the presser foot, because that could cause another situation. If the foot isn't aligned properly, the needle might be rubbing on the foot, the back of the foot or the front of the foot, and that will also cause all kinds of thread shredding and irregularities in your free motion machine quilting. Some of us will forget to put the presser foot down. This is probably the second most common mistake that is made. So not only does the needle not line up correctly now, but you have no tension. If you saw my thread tension video, you learned that when the presser foot goes down, those tension discs close. And now we have two problems working against us. So on this machine, again, I need to make sure my presser foot lifter lever is down and I'm set for my free motion. And I would then also go ahead and drop the feed dogs and making sure that everything is secure and everything is nice as it comes through here. So let me show you this now. As I slide a piece of fabric in, you'll notice the action of the foot. Presser foot is now down, and you can see that the presser foot itself, you see the spring motion right there, is lifting with each stroke of the machine. If you have on one of the ruler feet, you need to, or I should say one of the floating style feet or ruler feet, you need to adjust the height of that foot within the settings of the machine so that your quilt is not bouncing around like a lowrider at a stop sign. You want your quilt nice and flat on the bed of the machine right before that needle punctures delivering the thread, because that's going to hold everything nice and secure. So that's really probably what you've learned today. The most important was having the right foot on, and whether you're using a spring or a floating foot and how to adjust that floating foot. But the last thing I will mention, and I did mention it in my thread tensions video as well, was our threads themselves. A lot of times when we start to think about free motion machine quilting, we start thinking quilting threads. So we see these big, beautiful spools of these variegated threads and all of this different kind of stuff. And a lot of times we'll just set them on the top of our machine. Oh, that, you can see a little bit better that way. Set them on the top of the machine, and what happens is the thread is now forced to rotate as the thread is pulling off. Well, this thread spool weighs a considerable amount of actual weight. So if this had to rotate for all of our sewing, that's going to cause a lot of friction and irregularities, especially as the threads change in weight. So you could have something throwing off your tension that's therefore throwing off your success in your free motion quilting. Most likely, the best solution is, and I recommend one of these for just about everybody, is a wonderful thread tower or thread stand. Something like this is going to allow me to lay any size thread I want behind the machine generally. The thread's just going to come up and over this loop, so as the thread comes off, the spool itself never has to rotate. It just allows the thread to come off nice and evenly, and from here we're going to feed this right into the sewing machine right as it would normally go straight from the spool regular sitting in the top. That makes for a real even, nice sewing, and then you can use the heavier threads. But most importantly, what I want you to hear is your thread is not spinning, so therefore it's not changing while you're trying to work within your quilting. There are a few other notions that actually will help in free motion machine quilting, in my best opinion. So I don't know if it's troubleshooting or not, but these are things that might really help you become more successful or more rhythmic in your machine quilting. And the first is, well, let me pull this out of here real quick. The first is what they call a sew slip mat or a slider mat. These are wonderful because what these do is they go on the bed of the machine like this, filling in the space, not to mention having a nice extension table. Of course, that was kind of the number one thing, if this is the number two thing. Having a nice workspace where both of your hands can go out nice and flat really, really helps with free motion quilting. Secondly, having something like this that's going to go on the bed of the machine, which is now going to be, this is a Teflon top, so it's going to make your fabric slide more easily over the machine. So it's going to reduce the friction. And then lastly, and you can see these are filthy, I won't even put them on, but the Machinger's gloves, I absolutely love these. They're a lightweight glove that have a bit of like a silicone in the tip. So I now have kind of a rubberized finger, which helps me grab the fabric from the top end. So imagine it's like Spider-Man fingers with an ice skating rink below you, and that really helps the fabric move really nice and smoothly while you're trying your free motion machine quilting. Another tip I'd like to offer, I don't know if it's troubleshooting or not, but if you're brand new to free motion machine quilting, one of the things I do actually recommend doing is using polyester thread in the needle and in the bobbin when you're first starting. Now, I know that grandmother just rolled over in her grave when she heard me say that, because quilting is all things cotton, right? Except for it really isn't. It's using what makes sense. It's using what makes your project work out. Polyester thread is stronger, folks, and so a lot of new quilters struggle because they don't get a very good rhythm. Then they're constantly breaking their thread and shredding their thread, and the only thing they ever get good at is rethreading the machine. They don't get good at actually quilting. So my recommendation in your early practice projects is use polyester thread. It will allow you to develop a rhythm and some motifs that make you feel successful in your free motion machine quilting, Back to the beginning of what I was saying. Now you know what you're going to quilt while you start quilting it. And then of course, as you graduate into the quilts that you really want to give as those special gifts, you'll use cotton threads or rayon threads or whatever you want to use. But the polyester is just a really nice set of training wheels for you. And lastly, if it's not the HL-X5 needle that you should be using in your high-speed machine, then I would recommend using the Microtex or the Sharps. Those are the same style needle from different manufacturers, but a Sharp size 80/12 needle, because it has a really aggressive tip. And that just allows the needle to penetrate through all of the layers, the top, the batting, the backing of the quilt really fast, because you may be skipping stitches because of all of the density. Maybe you're like me and you like to do a lot of applique. So when you put applique on top of all this patchwork, it can slow the needle's travel through the project and you can skip stitches. And if you skip 2 or 3 stitches in a row, then you're going to start to get shredded threads on the bottom and things are going to go south from there. So sometimes one problem can lead to another, to another, to another. So try to think like a scientist, right? If the machine was doing beautifully while you were doing patchwork, not much has changed when you drop the feed dogs. So maybe just having a fresh needle, maybe having a different series of threads set up, but most likely it's just having the proper presser foot like I was trying to describe earlier. Try a spring motion foot if you're brand new to free motion quilting. It is the old-fashioned way of doing it, but it really works terrific. The only time you really need a floating foot is if you're doing the ruler work. That's what it's designed for. Everything else, that spring foot works terrific, especially with applique like I like to do. And let me leave you with all of this today, folks. With anything troubleshooting, first of all, don't panic. Take a deep breath and just slow down, okay? We're only making quilts here. But then, like I said, think like a scientist. Only change one thing at a time. So if you just dropped your feed dogs to go into free motion and you didn't change anything else, well, maybe the feed dogs didn't go down all of the way. Maybe you didn't get the presser foot on just right. Maybe it's too high or too low, or it's a presser foot from a different sewing machine. They are not always interchangeable, okay? Maybe you just need a fresh needle. Maybe you need to rethread, something like that. Maybe you need to consider that all of the fusible web with all of the glue and all of the layers have changed things. So we need to maybe run the machine a little faster, a little harder, all of these things, but just change one thing at a time so you know what it was you did that fixed the solution that happened today. Folks, I hate to tell you this, but it will happen again. This is quilting. We will shred threads. We will break threads. We will use our seam rippers and we will have a blast because this is what we love to do here. And I'm glad you were here. I hope you learned something. Please, in the comments below, let me know what other kinds of technical information about sewing machines, specifically in relationships to quilting, and how I can help you. Thanks again for being here today. We'll see you next time at Sew Well. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. It really helps support our channel. If you haven't subscribed, do so now. Hit the little button to be notified every time we go live or do a new video for all of you. And here's one from the past I think you'll really enjoy.